The dismissal came swiftly. You served coffee to the man with the service dog right in front of the health inspector. Her supervisor didn't raise his voice. His tone was icy, resolute, absolute. No mercy to be found. You're terminated, Madison. Gather your belongings. Your employment here is finished. 6 years of dedicated service, erased in moments. She didn't contest it, didn't weep. She simply removed her apron with quivering hands and exited. Not because she violated policy, but because she defended a veteran with his assistance animal. What Madison hadn't realized was that someone had captured everything on video. And within 60 minutes, 4 military vehicles entered the parking area. Leading them was a Marine colonel, someone who once owed his existence to that very veteran. And from that instant, everything began to transform permanently. Welcome to Heartfelt Chronicles, where narratives of generosity and benevolence unfold. Let's discover what actually transpired. My name is Lucy Michaels, and I've been employed at Liberty Brews Café in Ridgewood, South Carolina for 24 months. I work mornings as a barista, typically arriving at 5 a.m. and departing by 10 a.m. We're a small community with significant Marine presence. We're only a quarter hour from Station Valor, one of the most extensive Marine Corps instruction facilities on the Atlantic seaboard. Everyone locally knows military personnel. Most residents are service members or have family ties to them. That's why Liberty Brews was exceptional. Not for its beverages, but because of her. Madison wasn't merely our supervisor. She embodied the soul of the establishment. She recalled names, children's birthdays, deployment schedules. She maintained an age journal behind the register, filled with small details. Mr. Cooper prefers additional vanilla on top. Or, Mrs. Weiss suffered a daughter's loss last autumn. Check her well-being. She coordinated veterans' coffee gatherings every Wednesday and ensured any veteran with a service animal never needed explanations because she comprehended. Her father was a Marine, now retired, but he'd visit with companions on Wednesdays and recount experiences over dark coffee and breakfast pastries. Madison always remarked this place sustained him. I simply wish to reciprocate. And then arrived that morning, just after 9, a brisk Wednesday, the type of day where steam ascended from hot beverages like phantoms. Jason Williams entered with his German Shepherd, detective, tall individual, reserved, always positioned near the window. Rarely conversed, but detective never departed his side. Wore his crimson vest. Assistance animal, do not disturb, embroidered in prominent white letters. Madison was managing the counter. I handled espresso. She smiled at Jason and gestured. That's when he appeared, Kevin Barnes, the new district sanitation inspector. I'd encountered him once previously, but that sufficed. He possessed the demeanor of someone who enjoyed closing establishments. Meticulously pressed attire, clipboards secured firmly beneath his arm like weaponry. He surveyed the surroundings, gaze sweeping like radar, then fixed upon detective. He halted. This constitutes an infraction, he announced, sufficiently loud for everyone to hear. Jason's hand wavered on his cup. Madison approached, composed and collected. Sir, he's a registered assistance animal. ADA legislation safeguards his right to be present. Barnes's complexion reddened. I'm unconcerned what category of canine it is. You're providing food. It's unsanitary. It's federal legislation, Madison replied, still serene. You cannot simply disregard that. I can execute whatever I desire, he retorted. This cafe will be documented and closed unless that creature is removed immediately. Jason rose, startled. Detective pressed closer to his leg, perceiving the tension. The entire room grew silent. You could hear the milk steamers whir and nothing beyond. Then Madison stated something I'll eternally remember. I won't expel a veteran and his assistance animal to accommodate your preferences, sir. That concluded it. Before everyone, patrons, staff, even elderly Mr. Donovan, nearly deaf, the regional administrator, Sandra Hamilton, who coincidentally visited for routine evaluation, stormed forward and declared, You're dismissed, Madison. Clear your station now. Gasps, stillness. Madison didn't dispute, didn't sob. She simply removed her apron, passed me, and whispered, "Ensure Jason receives his coffee, understood?" She departed through the side entrance. Her father hadn't even arrived for Veterans Coffee Hour yet. I stood motionless, genuinely uncertain how to proceed, but the Marines understood perfectly. 35 minutes afterward, I was cleaning the counter when I perceived it. A deep, continuous rumble. Initially, I assumed thunder, but then the sound intensified. Boots connecting with pavement. Swing vehicles advancing deliberately. The windows began vibrating. I glanced outside. My astonishment was absolute. 4 military vehicles entered the area, and behind them, dozens of uniformed individuals. Not just anyone. Colonel Adam Reynolds, base commander of Station Valor. He disembarked first, his expression unreadable. His gaze swept the cafe, then locked onto me through the window. I barely managed respiration. The doors opened, and suddenly everything altered. The bell above the entrance chimed, but nobody inside stirred. We remained immobile as the Marines entered, boots striking the floor like a silent countdown. Perhaps 20 of them, each in complete dress blues, medals, ribbons, creases precise enough to slice paper, and centered among them, Colonel Reynolds. He wasn't particularly tall, not boisterous, but the atmosphere shifted with his entrance, as if gravity exerted greater force around him. You sensed it internally. I'd observed him previously at community functions, parades, fundraisers, but never like this. Never with that expression. He proceeded directly to the register. "Is Jason Williams present?" His voice was subdued, steady, like calmness preceding a deluge. Jason rose gradually from the corner table, detective rising alongside him. His hands trembled slightly, but he nodded. "Yes, sir." Colonel Reynolds turned toward him. And what occurred next, I'll never forget. He elevated his hand in a measured, deliberate salute. Jason froze. Then, barely perceptibly, he returned it. Every Marine present followed suit. The entire room saluted one individual. Customers stood silently. Even Mr. Barnes, the inspector, paled. His clipboard lowered slightly in his grasp. Colonel Reynolds sustained the salute, then dropped his hand and pivoted toward him. "You must be Mr. Barnes," he said coolly. "I've examined your report from this morning." Barnes stammered. I didn't recognize he was." "You needn't know someone's identity to treat them with fundamental dignity." The colonel's voice remained level. It didn't require elevation. Barnes swallowed visibly. Then Colonel Reynolds directed his attention to Sandra Hamilton, the regional administrator who terminated Madison barely an hour earlier. "I understand your company maintains zero tolerance for employees who contravene health regulations," he stated. "But I wonder, do you maintain policy for when your staff upholds federal legislation and defends a decorated veteran?" Sandra shifted uncomfortably. "Colonel, I wasn't aware you were—" He interrupted her. "You witnessed it happen and dismissed her regardless." That's when Madison's father entered. He didn't even remove his jacket. He halted abruptly at the sight of uniforms, then noticed Colonel Reynolds and stiffened. "Colonel," he uttered, astonished. Reynolds smiled and approached. "Delightful to encounter you again, Sergeant Crane." They clasped hands like longtime comrades. Madison's father surveyed the scene, bewildered. "What's transpiring here?" "We're here concerning your daughter." That statement impacted everyone profoundly. Meanwhile, I entered the back where Madison had been collecting her possessions. She sat on the bench contemplating her identification badge. "Still present?" she inquired, not turning. "Someone desires conversation," she sighed. "If it's Sandra, she can preserve her apology." It's not Sandra. Then I opened the door and the colonel entered. Madison stood immediately, brushing crumbs from her lap like reporting for duty. "Miss Crane," he said gently, "I wish to speak with you personally." She blinked. Sir, I've been monitoring your efforts here extensively. Veterans Coffee Hour, Assistance Animal Support. You've established a community rivaling what exists on base. You didn't merely provide coffee, you served us." She swallowed audibly. "I was simply doing what seemed appropriate. That's why I'm offering employment." She stared at him, astounded. I'm initiating a new veteran outreach program at Station Valor. We require someone who comprehends not merely policy, but individuals. Someone who cares sufficiently to advocate when necessary. Madison's expression registered shock. She glanced at me. I nodded. You'd be ideal, I said. She returned her gaze to him. I'm uncertain how to respond. Say yes, he smiled. Outside, information circulated. People began assembling beyond the cafe, observing the military vehicles and capturing images. Several local journalists appeared. Someone broadcasted live on Facebook. The narrative was disseminating, but the Marines hadn't concluded. Colonel Reynolds addressed the remaining customers. If anyone here witnessed this morning's events, I encourage submitting statements. We're pursuing this with state legal counsel. That's when Jason stepped forward. His voice was gentle but distinct. She rescued me, he stated. That woman, Madison, she didn't merely serve coffee. She provided space where I could exhale. A place where nobody regarded me as damaged. She allowed me humanity again. Detective nudged his leg and settled beside him. The colonel nodded solemnly. That moment, I'll eternally remember. 2 hours later, the cafe closed prematurely. Madison departed with Colonel Reynolds, traveling to Station Valor for a tour of her potential new position. Sandra Hamilton entered a private meeting with corporate, and Mr. Barnes was escorted from the premises by a uniformed officer. By sunset, the entire community had learned what transpired, and by morning, the photograph of Madison standing outside the cafe beside Colonel Reynolds had circulated virally. But nothing compared to what she discovered awaiting the following day in a manila envelope resting quietly on her apartment's doorstep. Inside lay a handwritten letter and a silver star. Jason had never revealed to anyone he'd earned it, but now he presented it to her for courage. He wrote, because you demonstrated what it resembles. When Madison exited the Jeep at Station Valor, something atmospheric changed. It wasn't the base's magnitude or the structured chaos of troops jogging past and exercises echoing distantly. It was how every Marine who passed seemed to recognize her. Some nodded, others offered a respectful "ma'am," and several even smiled as if they identified her appearance from somewhere because they had. The video of her standing resolutely in that cafe had been viewed by thousands within 24 hours. By her arrival on base, Madison Crane had become emblematic, a barista who advocated when others remained silent. Colonel Reynolds walked alongside her, his stride calm and measured. You've created quite an impression, he remarked. I didn't intend to, she replied, eyes widening as they passed recruits standing attentively. That's why it succeeded, he said simply. They entered headquarters through tall glass entrances flanked by 2 flags waving in the afternoon breeze. Inside, everything appeared clean, precise, and functioning with quiet urgency. Madison followed the colonel into a conference room overlooking the parade ground. A folder awaited on the table. Please sit. She complied, still disbelieving any of this was authentic. I want complete transparency, he said, sitting opposite her. This isn't ceremonial designation. The position I'm offering carries significance. You'd be responsible for 3 major initiatives: veteran transition assistance, community mental health outreach, and the Service Animal Partnership Program. Madison blinked. That's substantial. You've already accomplished most independently, he said, gesturing toward the folder. We've observed Liberty Brews, especially Veterans Coffee Hour. That modest event developed into one of the strongest peer support networks in the county. He paused. I read Jason Williams' statement this morning. It was sincere, powerful. Madison lowered her gaze. He's endured considerably. More than most realize, the colonel said, his voice suddenly quieter. He opened the folder and slid a document toward her. It was a redacted report, sections blacked out, but one segment remained readable. Sergeant Jason Williams, Silver Star recipient, Operation Mountain Shield, Helmand Province, June 2011. Evacuated 3 wounded comrades under fire. Lost 3 fingers. Diagnosed PTSD Category 4. Approved for civilian transition in 2014. Madison read it twice. I had no knowledge, she whispered. He doesn't discuss it, not even with us. She looked up. But he trusts Detective, and he trusts you. That afternoon, Madison toured the facility. She met therapists, social workers, and a retired Navy corpsman who'd lost his leg and now managed the K-9 pairing division. The man, Chief Petty Officer Brian Stone, walked with a prosthetic and a cane carved with an eagle's talon wrapped around the handle. He smiled upon seeing her. "You're the coffee lady," he said, shaking her hand. "Guilty. I've heard veterans discuss your cafe more than their own families. You possess something uncommon, Miss Crane. You listen. That matters more than degrees or titles." He introduced her to three veterans currently awaiting pairing with dogs. One, a young woman named Alice, barely 23, displayed burn scars along her neck and arms, and hadn't uttered a word in 2 months, until she saw Madison. "I recognize you," Alice said quietly. "You're the girl from the video." Madison knelt beside her. "I'm just an ordinary person who created some noise, but I'm genuinely pleased you're here." Alice regarded the German shepherd resting beside her bed. "Her name's Luna," she said. "They say she's mine. I'm uncertain if I merit her." "You do," Madison said immediately. "You absolutely do." That night back in her apartment, Madison couldn't sleep. She sat on her sofa, contemplating the silver star Jason had left. It rested in a simple velvet container. No message, no ceremony, just quiet significance. Her phone vibrated. It was Lucy. "Lucy Michaels. The entire town's discussing you. Liberty Brews is chaotic without you. Madison, you're managing adequately. Lucy, not identical. Returning soon?" Madison didn't answer promptly. She considered everything she'd witnessed that day. The wounded, the hopeful, those still carrying invisible burdens. And she thought about Alice, about Jason, about her father. She finally typed, "Lucy, I believe I'm precisely where I belong." But not everyone rejoiced. Inside a dimly illuminated office on the second floor of the Regional Health Department building, Mr. Kevin Barnes sat before a glowing computer screen, a half-consumed coffee cup beside him. He replayed the video again, the one where he berated Jason, where Madison defended, where the colonel entered. He muttered under his breath, "Made me appear foolish." A knock sounded at the door. He quickly closed the browser. "Enter." A man in tailored gray attire stepped inside. He wasn't from the local office. He wore a gold insignia on his lapel, a bald eagle clutching arrows. "I represent Internal Affairs, Omar Renari," the man said. "We need to discuss your conduct." Kevin Barnes's face drained of color. And just like that, the situation began to reverse. Jason Williams hadn't intended to share his story. He never enjoyed speaking before audiences. Not before combat, definitely not afterward. But when Wednesday arrived again, and veterans began gathering at Station Valor's new outreach center, something within him shifted. Madison was there arranging fresh coffee, wiping the long wooden table, adjusting chairs exactly as she used to at Liberty Brews. It wasn't a cafe anymore, but it felt similar, and that created the distinction. The room was silent that morning. 10 veterans sat in a loose circle, familiar faces and unfamiliar ones. Men and women, some young, some gray-haired. Alice sat with Luna at her feet. She hadn't conversed much recently, but she hadn't missed a session either. Jason arrived last as customary. Detective padded beside him, steady as always. He didn't sit immediately. He stood at the group's edge, one hand on Detective's collar. "I'm uncertain why I'm standing," he began. His voice was subdued, hesitant. "I've never vocalized this." Madison glanced up but remained stationary, just listened. Jason swallowed firmly. "It was 2011. Hellman, Operation Mountain Shield. We were exposed when the convoy struck an IED. The vehicle behind us detonated first." He paused. "There were 3 soldiers inside. One perished instantly. The other 2 screamed. The room remained motionless. I charged in regardless. Caught shrapnel. Burned my hands. Lost digits." He examined his right hand, clenched tightly. "The third man was trapped. I extracted him. Then everything darkened." Nobody uttered a word. Jason inhaled deeply. When I regained consciousness, they informed me I'd earned a silver star, but they never explained how to exist with what I witnessed or what I failed to accomplish. Madison stood then and approached to refill the coffee container, a quiet gesture allowing Jason opportunity to breathe, but then he gazed directly at her. 2 years ago, I couldn't enter a room without recoiling. Detective helped, but you, he nodded toward her, you provided healing space. You never questioned. You simply treated me like I mattered. Madison's hands paused on the coffee container handle. Jason sat gradually, and for the first time, Alice extended across the table and touched his arm. Thank you, she whispered. Later that afternoon, Madison sat in Colonel Reynolds' office, the morning's weight still clinging to her. He conversed on the phone with someone from Washington, pacing slowly near the window. His tone was clipped, but composed. Yes, understood. No, she hasn't accepted yet. Yes, I'll converse with her again. He concluded the call and turned toward Madison. They want to offer you a national position, he said without preamble. She blinked. What category of position? Director of Community Veteran Initiatives. It would involve travel, speaking engagements, establishing programs like this nationwide. Madison sat slowly. And if I decline, you remain here. Continue your current work. We'll support either decision. She hesitated. I didn't enroll for any of this, she said. No, he replied, but you earned it. She observed the photograph on his desk, a black and white image of young Reynolds, standing in muddy fatigues with two other Marines. May I be candid? She asked. Please. I don't desire becoming symbolic. I simply want to continue beneficial work. Reynolds nodded. Then perhaps that's exactly what this nation requires. That evening, Madison called her father. He didn't answer initially, probably watching an old Western with excessive volume, but eventually he responded. Hey, kiddo, his warm voice greeted. Adjusting well? Somewhat, she paused. Dad, did you ever feel engaged in something greater than yourself? He chuckled. Every single time I donned that uniform. Madison smiled. Even during difficulties, especially then, she swallowed. I face a decision. I trust you'll select correctly. And that concluded his statement. The following morning, the outreach center was crowded. More veterans than usual. Word had circulated regarding Jason's account, and now new individuals appeared. Several had driven from distant counties. Some had never discussed their service previously. Madison stood before them all. She surveyed the room, the aged wooden floor, the folding chairs, the wall now lined with photographs of veterans and their service animals. Then she inhaled deeply. I've been offered something significant, she stated, but honestly, nothing seems more critical than this. The room remained silent. So I'm staying. Applause erupted. Colonel Reynolds, standing quietly behind, smiled. She wasn't merely their host anymore. She was their voice. And across town in Kevin Barnes's office, a new report arrived on his desk. This one didn't concern Café violations. It addressed him, and it commenced with 5 condemning words. Conduct unbecoming of a public official. For the first time, he faced investigation, and the tempest he initiated was beginning to return upon him. 3 weeks passed, and Station Valor's new outreach center was no longer merely a pilot initiative. It thrived. Every Wednesday morning, vehicles lined up outside before sunrise. Veterans from 3 neighboring counties arrived with service animals, canes, wheelchairs, in silent burdens too substantial to name. Madison called them morning warriors. Some remained only minutes. Some conversed for hours. Others simply sat but continued returning. One afternoon, Alice painted a sign and hung it near the coffee station. No rank here, just respect. It became the place's motto. But just as matters seemed settled, the letter arrived, stamped with the Department of Defense seal. It addressed Colonel Reynolds directly. He opened it gradually in his office. Madison sitting across from him, sensing something amiss. What is it? She inquired. His jaw tightened. They're dispatching a review board, he stated. 3 inspectors, civilian sector. They want to evaluate compliance and standards across all veteran community programs. Is that normal? Not this soon, not this detailed, and not targeted. Madison frowned. Targeted how? Reynolds leaned forward. I believe someone's promoting this from within the state office. Probably someone seeking to discredit us. Madison's heart sank. Kevin Barnes. The colonel nodded. He still maintains influential connections, but now he has something to forfeit. The review board arrived 4 days later. 2 men in suits, 1 woman with a tight bun and a colder smile. They introduced themselves emotionlessly, took constant notes, and walked through the outreach center with quiet judgment. They inspected everything: kitchen safety, therapy records, dog kennels, even Madison's coffee machine. One asked her, "What certifications do you possess to conduct therapeutic support groups?" She regarded him. None, merely kindness and consistency. He remained expressionless. Information circulated rapidly. By evening, the outreach center resembled a courtroom more than sanctuary. Veterans arrived nervously, uncertain whether to speak or remain silent. Several were overheard muttering, "They'll close it." Jason Williams sat silently in his usual location, hand resting on Detective's head. He hadn't spoken since the reviewers arrived, but Madison had finished being silent. The next morning, she requested a meeting with everyone: veterans, staff, volunteers, even inspectors. The conference hall filled by 8 a.m. Madison stood at the front wearing her usual attire: jeans, boots, and a "Support Those Who Serve" t-shirt. "I understand your presence," she said calmly, "and I recognize what certain individuals want you to discover. But before deciding, I want you to meet those this program has assisted." She turned. "Jason?" He glanced up, surprised. "Will you speak again?" Jason rose slowly, approached the front. The room quieted. "I believed I didn't deserve assistance," he said. "But Madison demonstrated I needn't earn it. I simply needed to accept it." He gestured toward Alice. She smiled initially here. Alice offered a slight nod, eyes moist. Then individually, others rose. An older veteran with a cane, a young amputee with trembling hands, a Marine sergeant who admitted he hadn't communicated with his children in 6 years until last week. They all stood, not shouting, not pleading, just standing. It spoke louder than any speech. That evening, the lead inspector requested private words with Madison. She met him in Colonel Reynolds' office, where the colonel waited with crossed arms. The inspector cleared his throat. "We've reviewed every document, interviewed every participant. What we witnessed today wasn't a program. It was a community." Madison remained silent. "Miss Crane," he continued, "we'll recommend this center as a national model. We've never encountered anything comparable." Relief washed over her like a wave. Colonel Reynolds smiled for the first time that day, but the inspector hadn't finished. "One additional matter," he said, presenting her a folder. "You're nominated for civilian commendation for service to national veteran welfare." Madison opened the folder and stopped breathing. It was signed by the Secretary of Defense. The following morning, Madison arrived early before anyone. She stood in the center's silence, staring at the photograph wall facing her. She reached up and pinned a new one centrally: Jason, Detective, Alice, and herself. Below it, a brass plaque with just 5 words: "This place preserved my life." Then someone entered through the front door. She turned. It was Kevin Barnes, but he wasn't wearing formal attire. He wore civilian clothes, eyes sunken, shoulders slumped. Madison remained stationary. He approached holding a thin envelope. "I resign," he said quietly, "before termination." She regarded the envelope. "What's this?" He hesitated. "Written apology, and something additional. From someone you assisted long ago, a name you might recall." She opened it slowly. Inside lay a photograph. Her and a uniformed man years earlier, smiling before the cafe, and the note read, "Tell Madison she rescued me before I even realized I was lost." Tears formed in her eyes. She looked up. Kevin Barnes had already departed, but his damage would never constitute the final statement. because what Madison constructed no longer belonged solely to her. It belonged to every veteran who entered those doors. And nothing, not politics, not vengeance, not fear, could remove that. The invitation arrived in a navy blue envelope sealed with the Department of Defense emblem. National Veterans Leadership Conference, Washington, D.C. It addressed Madison Crane with handwritten notes below. Your narrative has become our narrative. Will you speak for everyone? Colonel Reynolds found her in the therapy room, kneeling beside a new veteran recently paired with his dog, a golden retriever named Faith. Appears you have another mission, he said, extending the envelope. Madison read it slowly, then exhaled. She didn't want to attend. Truthfully, she disliked platforms, disliked attention. She preferred pouring coffee and remembering birthdays, not entering grand auditoriums with cameras and generals, but it transcended her. Not anymore. And when Alice squeezed her hand and whispered, "You represent all of us," Madison understood. She must attend. The conference day arrived cold and gray. D.C. wrapped in mist and marble. Madison stood at the Capitol's base, gazing upward at its columns, her speech folded tightly in her pocket. She wore a navy blazer over jeans. Nothing elaborate, just sufficient for courage. Then familiar voice behind her. "Need transportation, Miss Crane?" She turned. Jason Williams, dressed in complete marine blues, polished immaculately. Detective trotted proudly beside him, tail wagging like comprehending the significance. "Jason," she breathed. He nodded. "The base assigned me as your escort." She laughed, partially nerves, partially awe. "You appear impressive," he smirked. "You're addressing the Pentagon." She sobered. "I'm unprepared." "You are." They walked side by side through security checkpoints, past media, into echoing marble corridors. Inside the main chamber, hundreds of service members, commanders, officials, and veteran advocates occupied seats. On stage, a podium bearing her name. Madison's hands trembled. Jason leaned closer. "Remember what you always told me?" She regarded him. He smiled. "Just be human. That suffices." When Madison approached the microphone, the room hushed. She scanned the audience and commenced. "I'm not a physician. I'm not a general. I'm not anyone extraordinary, truly." Pause. "I supervised a small coffee establishment near a Marine base. I knew every regular's preference and maintained a notebook behind the register with notes like, 'Steve prefers additional cinnamon,' or 'Mrs. Yu lost her son last winter. Inquire about her condition.'" A few chuckles. "But what I discovered was this. Veterans don't require grand speeches. They don't need perfect policies. They need places where they're visible, remembered, and respected." She paused again, her throat constricted. "My father was a Marine. He returned different, quieter, more distant. I was merely a child. I didn't comprehend PTSD. I just assumed he no longer loved us." Silence. "One night, I discovered him on the porch or staring at nothing, holding his service weapon." Gasps. "I didn't speak. I just sat with him. Hours elapsed. Then he set the gun down. He looked at me and said, 'Thank you for remaining.'" Tears descended her cheek. "So no, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a soldier. I'm just someone who stayed, who provided coffee, who listened." She gazed directly into the audience. "And I will never cease." Thunderous applause. Later that evening, Madison stood alone outside the venue, the sun setting over the Potomac. She needed air. A shadow appeared beside her. An older man, white beard, wrinkled hands, dark eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses. He smiled gently. "You don't recollect me?" She tilted her head. "Should I?" He produced a photograph yellowed with time, her years younger, handing food to a disheveled man outside the cafe. "That was me," he said. "You provided lunch every Wednesday for months." She gasped. "You wore the green cap." He nodded. "I was homeless. Hadn't spoken with my daughter in 10 years. Didn't believe I deserved another opportunity." He paused. "I do now. And that's because of you. He pressed something into her hand. A pin, aged silver, shaped like an eagle's wing. I wore this when rejoining my family. It's yours now. She attempted to speak, but words failed. Only tears emerged. That night in her hotel, Madison sat on the windowsill, pin in hand. For the first time in weeks, she felt tranquil. Not vacant, not overwhelmed, just tranquil. And somewhere deep within her chest, where sorrow previously resided, something warm finally established roots. Not pride, not power, just peace. The aircraft landed in South Carolina just after noon. Madison disembarked carrying only her duffel bag, the silver eagle pin still fastened quietly to her blazer. She hadn't conversed much since the conference. Her phone contained dozens of unread messages, news organizations, veteran groups, even an invitation from the governor. But she only wanted to return home. And by home, she didn't mean her apartment. She meant Liberty Brew's Café. The cafe appeared unchanged. Same creaking entrance, same coffee-stained counter, same aroma of cinnamon and toast. Lucy stood behind the register, startled when Madison entered. "You're supposedly famous now," she teased. "I'm merely seeking coffee." Madison smiled. Lucy poured silently and slid it across the counter. Then she leaned closer. "You salvaged this place, Madison. After your departure, it lost its essence." Madison surveyed the surroundings. Photographs still adorned the wall, but now new ones appeared. Alice, Jason, Luna, veterans laughing, embracing. The cafe had transformed because she had transformed it. Later that afternoon, Madison drove to her father's old fishing location, a secluded bend in the forest beside the lake. She brought two items, the pin and the silver star. The breeze rustled the trees gently as she sat waterside, placing both items on a flat stone. "Hello, Dad," she whispered. "I accomplished it. I defended. I remained." She closed her eyes. "I finally understand why you simply sat here. Sometimes silence best communicates." She left the pin on the rock facing the water. The following week, Station Valor conducted its annual Veterans Day ceremony, an event typically attracting modest crowds. This year, standing room only. The new outreach center arranged additional chairs outside. Soldiers volunteered to transport elderly veterans in golf carts. A military children's choir performed the anthem. At the event's center stood a new statue. Not a soldier, not a general, but a woman holding a coffee cup kneeling beside a service dog. No name, just 5 engraved words. Kindness, courage, community, coffee, home. Madison stood behind, astonished. She hadn't authorized it. She hadn't known. Colonel Reynolds stepped beside her. "We determined it was time to immortalize the genuine hero," he said. She restrained tears. "I didn't perform anything exceptional." He regarded her. "Precisely." As the event concluded, veterans and families placed flags around the statue's base. Alice delivered a brief speech, her first public address. Jason and Detective posed for photographs with schoolchildren. And then spontaneously, dozens began forming lines. Not to salute, not to weep, but to embrace Madison individually, silently, thanking her as words never could. That evening, as sunset descended behind Station Valor, Madison returned to the outreach center alone. The rooms were silent, the atmosphere warm. Outside, several veterans lingered, conversing near the fire pit. She stood before the photograph wall, now overflowing. Then she reached into her bag and extracted one final item, a new picture. Her and her father from childhood. Him uniformed, her pigtailed, both holding tiny American flags. She pinned it centrally and beneath placed a handwritten note. "He served the nation. I served those who returned." Then she extinguished the lights and walked into the evening, not solitary, but surrounded by legacy of quiet strength, simple actions, stories never forgotten. And as the door closed behind her, the wind carried whispers through trees. Thank you, Madison. In our darkest moments, compassion still discovers passage, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who assists desires acknowledgement. Some simply need awareness that today someone isn't hungry, and sometimes that alone suffices to transform existence. You might forget the narrative, but without retelling, history remains forever silent. Subscribe to Heartfelt Chronicles, where justice receives honor, kindness remembrance, and no act of quiet heroism ever vanishes.